Welcome everyone. My name is Roland Klemke and I am connected from Germany but represent the Netherlands today. So a bit of internationality we also represent here, even though we are the two of us organizing this session. Looking forward to meeting all of you maybe at one of the future summer schools that Michael introduced. But today I would like to introduce you to the field of technology enhanced learning with a kind of bird's eye view on the whole field and looking into some of the overall approaches that we have, of course, not covering in detail all of the different aspects that we have in this field, but maybe this can highlight a bit of the challenges that we are facing in this field. So you should now see my first slide, technology enhanced learning. What does that actually even mean? And how do we approach that? That's something we will cover in the upcoming hour. I want to have this hour that we have together basically also interactive, so you will have some things to do and to look into. So I will not talk just 1 hour to you, and we'll hopefully have some interaction. So technology enhanced learning. I mean, we have those 3 letters, TEL, and they will basically guide us through this talk, and we will look at them in different orders, and this order matters in some way, and that's what we try to find out. So actually, technology and learning is quite clear. Enhanced is something that we don't really know. Where do we come from? Either we come from a technology side, from computer science or related things, or we come more from the learning side, educational science related fields. And these are the things we typically know already a lot about. So some of us are on the T side, some of us are on the L side. The mysterious field in the middle is somehow something that we need to look into. So what is happening here? What does this enhance actually mean, and where does it lead us? That is what we want to look into. Therefore, we first look into the TEL field overall. What is it actually? So TEL basically is a field where we work in interdisciplinary manner. We have a lot of things from the technology side, from the learning side, theories, technologies, innovation, ideas, concepts, all of these things, also methods, research methods and approaches that we apply, projects in that area. There's a lot to look into, and there are a lot of buzzwords, keywords, subtopics, areas in which we look. Emerging fields, traditional fields, how do we do testing online? How do we use artificial intelligence for online learning? How do we use augmented and virtual reality? How do we structure learning materials to keep them motivating, to keep them attractive, to have interaction in online learning or in other fields of technology? So that's a lot we can look into. Now, if we look at this field, we can identify a lot of different goals also that we have. And if we come from the learning side, and technology enhanced learning is in the end about learning, we look into things like learning effects. We want to increase knowledge gain, we want to reduce learning time, or we want to help people master something on their own. There is also a lot more in terms of goals. We cannot go in depth in this introduction lecture. On technology side, we have totally different goals that we look into. We look into, is a system feasible? Can we have it reliable? Can it interoperate with other systems? Can we have it scalable? Can we keep it secure? Is it actually doing something? And if we then want to know how to combine these things together, how to use technological systems to look into learning, then we have some things like, is a learning system usable? Do users use it and accept it? Does it provide the motivation we need? Does it provide satisfaction? So that's more a bit from the system design perspective and reflecting on users, but that combined with the learning goals would bring these fields somehow together. And that's what we actually in this field of technology enhanced learning are striving for. Yeah? Now, each of these fields also has a lot of different methods to see whether approaches are successful or not. And that's what we as scientists actually always need to do. How do we make sure something that we're working with is good or good enough or an improvement over an existing situation? So in learning sciences, we use learning design or didactical design, other approaches to create learning materials, learning offers, learning programs, and then we test them. Pre-post tests we use assessments, observations, interviews to check if learners get along with what we do. On the other side, technology has approaches like software engineering, system design, and other approaches to say, like, how do we develop an architecture, a proof of concept, a prototype? How do we create standards for interoperability, measure performance, and do stress tests of systems? And then in the end, in our mysterious enhancement field, we need to look into those methods, like, can people use it? Do we do usability studies? Can we have acceptance measured with questionnaires? Can we track users with technology again and observe also what they do with a system? So all of these methods are basically what we use in the field of TEL to move the field forward. You know, that is what the field deals with. Now, one of the questions we're looking into is, of course, when you are starting your PhD research, what do you actually do? How do you approach? How do you know where you are, and how do you use all of these methods? So what you need to basically look into is the question, what is the target of the research group you're connected to? How do they address technology enhanced learning? Are you in a technology group that has learning as an application field, or are you in a learning science environment where you by chance use technology to do something, or are you in any other setting where you use technology enhanced learning to improve something? What is actually your approach? That also leads to which methods can you apply and how they match basically what you aim to research. Yeah? And then the question that follows is, if you know about these methods and you are in this big interdisciplinary field, how do you actually know if you will be, as a PhD student, able to use all these methods? Where are your personal gaps? At this point, I would like to have a very short interview question, especially addressing those of you who are PhD students or starting to be PhD students. What do you think? Where in the spectrum of TEL you are actually situated? Are you more a technology person? Are you more a learning science person? Or are you actually an enhancer in the middle? Are you actually in this interdisciplinary field? So why do I actually ask that question? That brings us basically to this question of how do we address research in such an interdisciplinary field of TEL. And I have brought with me basically 3 different approaches how you can do research in the TEL field. That does not mean that these cover everything that is possible, but these are prototypical approaches. One approach is what we call the theory-driven approach, and that typically is relevant for those of you who classify themselves as an L. So in that approach, you typically start with, for instance, you have a learning problem identified, you select a learning theory that helps you address this problem. From there, you move into selecting how can I do an intervention based on that learning theory to test whether it would actually improve the situation. And if you have such an intervention conceptually designed, you could move into either software engineering process where you say, for that intervention, I now need a prototype, or in many cases, you can also select an existing technology that may have originally not even been designed for learning and apply it in your intervention. That would be something, and then from there, you start, for instance, your evaluation. A typical example for that would be, many of you will know the concept of MOOC, massive open online courses. And within these, we have typically the problem, a high number of people will drop out. They will not complete the MOOC. And there's one theory called implementation intention theory that we might think of that helps people to state their own intention and then derive a plan of how to follow that plan. So an idea could be, can't we apply this theory in a gamification approach in a MOOC where we install something like the stimulated planning game element that helps me to plan my own learning curve, put it into a existing MOOC or design a new one, and have then a technological component that we want to have in our MOOC for which we collect data and then evaluate them. That could, for instance, lead to something like new widgets being developed in the end. And the challenge that you are facing in that, are you able to design such tools? Are you able to do those prototypes? And do you manage all those technical requirements that you have involved? So that is something, when approaching the PhD project, that is something you need to take care about. You're coming from the learning side, so that is typically covered. You're good at that. How do you transfer that into the technology world? Your supervisor should have some answer on how you address these things and what you can do in the end. Starting from the other end is what we would call the innovation approach. You have something like an emerging technology that offers new affordances, but it's yet unclear how that would be reflected in a learning scenario. So what you typically would do then is you do an experimental prototype. You do something and say, this could be something that we do with this new emerging technology. For instance, you use some virtual reality environment to do something and to try out something, but you don't yet know what is the correct way of doing that. And only then, after you've done it, you can do some experimentations to see if people like it, if people learn something within it, if people interact with the system, etc. And then you follow those constraints and do an experimental setup. You need, of course, to be careful to, for instance, avoid things like innovation bias, where you say, like, just because it's new, people like it. But that is a completely different approach, where you start basically at the other end of the spectrum and have a prototype available. So that could be usually done, for instance, in technological-driven research projects, like one that we have, by the way, Michael and me together also performed in recent years, the WeKit project. We had something like augmented reality for training. And then we assessed technological affordances, sensor-based augmented reality, derived hypothesis, how that could be like we record some people doing something and transfer it into virtual or augmented reality displays into what other people do, developed a prototype for that in a European project, had some piloting phase where we performed data collection, and then did these refinement steps. What do we actually do? How do we, from these steps, how do we systematize these results now to make them reproducible and to make them improve the quality? And that can deliver, for instance, something like a more complex architecture, a system architecture with a lot of components. We don't go into detail here. The question basically for people starting from that and coming with technology is also, yeah, how do you apply your research in such complex architecture? And typically this more complex technological setup is done in consortial projects, larger projects with different partners. How do you balance the different partner interests? How do you align your own PhD with such a consortial project, in this case on European level? And then there's also a follow-up question, namely when you want to derive what is a conceptual framework in that setting. That is something that is the bridge between the technology and the learning part. And the question is, how do you get to derive a conceptual theoretical framework from research prototypes into making them also reproducible, what you do. In this case, we selected a didactical theory for CID, 4 components for instructional design, and applied it to the technological affordances that we have to create that bridge. So in general, how do you derive a theoretical framework, and how do actually framework and software prototype match, which is a complex endeavor? Basically, you start for the framework from both sides. You need to look into the technology and the affordances, the different functionalities that are there, and you look into requirements in the learning processes and try to match them, and then derive evaluation steps from that. That is a typical approach here. Now, the third level, basically, of doing the research approach is what we call the service-oriented approach in doing TEL research. Here, you actually typically have an educational service, a technology already available. So, for instance, your organization may already run a MOOC platform and have some specific requirements set up there. But you want to evaluate that, and from that evaluation, you want to derive also improvements. You want to derive something. You need to know how well do people use it, how well is that service used, and what can we learn from that. And then you want to possibly apply research intervention to try out innovations, to try out enhancements to your existing service. And that basically means the enhancement comes from, we have a service, we have some results of the evaluation, and we consider some improvements from there, delivering your service approach. Now, a typical example here could again be with the example of MOOCs. You identify requirements for this educational service, you do some implementation of that service. That is basically the step probably before you as a PhD student come into play. You then have the educational offers there, and you want these to be evaluated and have some results about these. And then you identify problems and you address specifically these problems with a new research design. And that's a different approach than how to do that. An example for that could, for instance, again, from this project of gamification for MOOCs, could be you have a software architecture that you then derive from different approaches into having gamification applied, and you derive this architecture from it and try to deliver a more abstract service based on that one that you can reuse in several contexts. And the challenges here are that you are facing if you have this existing service. Is it understandable to you what that architecture comprises? How do you address that? Where do you have your points where you can actually provide some added value to it? And that makes it then sometimes a bit difficult to understand what is actually available and what is actually changeable to the existing service that is already in productive use in your organization. So with these steps, we basically have an overview of the three main approaches, or the three that I identified. There may be others. The question now is, you are a PhD student and you are in this situation and you need to do something. We had the first question whether you are a TL or E, and the truth may be, some of you also said already TE and EL or TL. So the question is, where do you basically belong in these ones? It may not be a perfect match, but there may be one of these letters that is basically the main one for you. And don't ever expect that it's basically a straight path and you will only do one of these steps and one of these iterations in your PhD research. You may go through even combinations of these things. So think also in iterations. But if we are talking now about these different approaches, maybe just focus on your current next step to go. So where would you identify you in your current situation now? Where you're looking forward to design your PhD project. And then we would like to basically give you a bit of insight on where would in the whole trajectory of your PhD research, where are your gaps that you can identify. If I remember well, Michael should now have shared in the chat a link to a Miro board. Actually, with this Miro board, with this link to the Miro board, which you also see here on the slide, we want you to now split into 3 different groups according to whether you are T, E, or L. In the Miro board, we have prepared 3 different strands representing the 3 examples we just went through. And every one of you is asked now to take the example that we have there and try to map your own research approach to that Miro board. Looking at the time, I think we have something like 25 to 30 minutes for that activity. Please correct me, Mikhail, if that would take too long.
That's a good estimation, yes.
All right. That would mean, please try to access this Miro board now and try to identify in which of the 3 areas you belong. Remember, theory-driven is if you're an L. Starting with the enhancement is basically, and then going with the technology development. Prototypical is the innovation approach that rather belongs to when you're a T, and going with the service approach would rather be when you are actually an E, even if you start then with the pre-existing technology. So I've been jumping around through the different breakout rooms. It seems that there was a bit of confusion between like how well do you map which of the approaches. So in some groups we discussed like, is it rather what you do this innovation research, or is it service research? How do we map something like design-based research onto the theory-driven research, or would design-based research already be a service model research? All of these can be possible, and all of these are also possible outcomes. I would like to have a quick short round, whether we can also do that in the chat right now, whether you found this a useful exercise to identify where you are in your TEL research and which steps you yourself think you already master well and which steps you didn't so much. I mean, I see people also answering in the chat. That is also okay. We also collect that. So thanks for all your contributions. I would want to now share one final slide, basically, with you before I hand over to Mikhail again. I mean, we have seen these 3 different approaches: theory-based, innovation-based, service-based. Reality, as we have also slightly discussed with some of the people, is basically all of it comes somehow together. Unfortunately, that's the complexity of the TEL field. We are always, and some of you have also been struggling with that thing like, am I really a T? Am I really an L or an E? All of these somehow come together, and that situation also evolves. Yeah, we already have some education being done. We don't never start into a research group and we start from scratch and they don't have anything. And they use some technologies already. Yeah, and they have some approaches to address their education. And they have already also something in mind how things could be improved and should be improved. So you're addressing all of these somehow at the same time. The important thing, however, is then how do we manage to approach that? Because that is overwhelming, and that's what the model should help you. And that's how we then say, how do I identify my steps? Where do I start? Is it like, do I need to focus on the technology first? Do I need to focus on learning theories first? And how do I make sure that these things get together to have an enhanced solution? Where do research methods, etc., come into play? So how do I map something like design-based research to the field of TEL, if that is the method I want to apply? And the important thing is also, as we are in an interdisciplinary field, while most of the PhD students entering this field come from a disciplinary background, you may have some gaps. Yeah, if you're a computer scientist, you don't know too much about learning theories. If you're a learning scientist, you don't know too much about computer science and their methods. So you need to learn some of these things while approaching a TEL PhD project, or you need to get support. You need to team up. You need to have complementing PhD students being in your team, or your research organization needs to provide some of the support. Otherwise, you run the risk that some of these things may be really stressful experiences. And that's also something we would like to support you with this program, to identify those things. Yeah? How do you actually approach things, and how do you identify, I need someone developing that prototype for me, or I need someone supporting me to select a prototype and apply it into my research, while the learning theory side I can cover myself, or vice versa, right? That was a bit the idea of this exercise. That is some food for thought after the exercise. Where do you have your own gap? Where are your highest risks? And try to identify them as early as possible to be able to address them. Yeah, and you have been all active, you have been discussing in the groups, so maybe that is something to take along. Identify your gaps and risks, and derive a plan to work on the, and in the field of TEL, we should all strive to become the E in terms of enhancing learning with technology. That should be basically our goal. If you think you're at the E, then you're at the right place, or you have a way to become one.